Thank you for joining and welcome to LeadDev Bookmarked. LeadDev is a global community of engineering leaders who come together to discuss all things leadership, teams, tools, and tech. Bookmarked is our monthly book club that takes place on the first Tuesday of every month. Our sessions cover an array of engineering and leadership books that our awesome LeadDev audience can draw insights and practical experiences from. I'm Suzan Bond, and I'm your moderator. I'm a former COO of a scaling startup and a leadership consultant. My specialty is tech leaders. You can find me on Twitter or all the places using my name. Today, we'll be talking about Leading Snowflakes. If you have questions for Oren, please pop them in the Q&A feature on Zoom. Oren is the Senior Vice President of Engineering at Forter, maker of Software Lead Weekly.com, which we were just talking about, managerreadme.com, downleft.com, and the author of Leading Snowflakes. Welcome. I didn't realize you had so many newsletters.
I weren't aware of it neither until you read it, and it's been so long. No, I'm kidding. It's yes. I'm kind of a builder at heart, and I like to play with different side projects, and so yes, I've been playing with many different ideas. Most of them I think are free, maybe other than maybe one or two. So you can definitely go and look it up. And yes, the newsletter is the Software Lead Weekly, which we covered in the beginning.
So great. All right. So I'd love to know, what made you write this book? What was the impetus?
Yeah. So it was after a few years of me trying to train new engineering managers in my company, which is difficult because I'm not sure exactly how to train engineering managers. So I just did my best to provide them things that I've learned in my journey. And then a few people from the industry in Israel kind of consulted with me, asking questions on similar journeys that they have, which led me to think that maybe creating a book would be an interesting way to share that. The frameworks, the tools, the techniques that I've been using. And so I thought it would be a nice challenge and a very good way to just provide some value back to the community that I've been getting so much from. So that was the idea behind the book. And to make sure that I'm not, taking 5 years to write the book, because writing a book is notoriously super difficult. Yep. I had a great hack, which is figuring out an interesting deadline. So my wife and I were expecting a baby boy. And I told myself that I have to complete the book and launch it before my baby boy is here with me, and I probably won't have any time or any sleep at all. So that kind of forces me to create a book. Again, I didn't really think about scale. It was me writing a book, like a digital book, giving it to a few friends and people I worked with, and just getting their reaction to see that their thing it's really valuable led me to create the website and making it, open to others to download and get some benefit from, I hope.
Wait, so I know how long it takes to have a baby, but did you start the book before it went? What was that? How short was that writing period? Was it the book, when you made that decision?
It was extremely short. I have a few hacks on that if someone wants to hear on how to write a book. It was about 6 months, the entire process.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. So a few months into the pregnancy, I didn't know when it was started, got it. So about 6 months. Yeah. That's a nice clip. That's a good size clip, Yeah. I know some people have said they write things in 2 weeks, and I don't understand that, but 6 months is a pretty quick, that's a nice amount of time.
Yeah. For me, it was short enough. It was extremely difficult, and it's my first book, so I really wasn't aware or didn't understand how much is involved around creating a book and figuring out how to make things kind of properly set up in a decent way.
Yep. That makes sense. You don't know until you get into it. All right. So I want to let's get into the book. So you talk about the shift from maker to manager, and I'm curious, what are maybe a couple of things that can help new managers do this? Because, This is a difficult shift for lots of people. It's quite a different job.
Yeah, it was incredibly hard for me when I did this shift for the first time, and I think that one of our worst enemies, in a sense, is just inertia. Understanding that things will happen whether we like it or not. So when I became a manager for the first time, it was amazing to see that there's so many incoming requests, incoming meetings, incoming whatever it is, that kind of completely overwhelmed and bombarded me with new things to work on. And some of it are immediate with urgency. Some of it is a bit more into the future. But again, like inertia is very, very strong. And there is a nice blog post by Paul Graham, one of the Silicon Valley, probably most known folks there, with Y Combinator and many other things, which I read his early post. And the post is like somewhere from 2010 or so, maybe before that. And it covers the maker schedule versus manager schedule, trying to kind of understand what's the difference between a schedule of a manager versus a schedule of an engineer, like a maker. And the idea there is that the maker, and we probably all noticed that, is that as a maker, I want to have long hours of non-disruptive, deep focus, effort, and whereas managers, with, of course, very little context switch, if I'm a maker, for managers, we are kind of living on context switches, and we have many meetings, and we need to shift gears and be able to touch and just handle a lot of different areas. So we often, as managers, have many meetings in the calendar, and we need to kind of organize our day. So again, the enemy is the inertia, right? Making sure that the calendar is working for us and the time is working for us versus just being bombarded with everything and jumping between meetings. So having that by Paul Graham, like this post kind of opened my eyes into, wait a minute, like there are different schedule and there are different preferences. So whether or not, now the question is, how can we manage that or get the most out of it so inertia wouldn't completely kill me? So the first recommendation that I think of when making this shift is, while understanding this inertia that we have, is the question of how much we want to play in this role as a maker versus the role of a manager. Now, in some cases, if I'm managing a very small team, let's say that I'm an engineering manager who has 2 developers on the team. Maybe I do need to be hands-on and I need to write code some of the days. It really depends. If I'm managing a bigger team or managing managers, maybe I don't need to write code at all. But also as a manager, I also need to be a maker. We'll probably cover it in a few minutes. But first of all, it's the question of how much do you want to be a maker, like you were before the transition, and how much do you need to be now a manager? And figure out what's the right ratio for you, given the expectations around you on what makes sense. So first is to ask that question. And then the idea that I felt really, really working for me is that makers, and at least I'm speaking from my experience, I really like to work on deep focus type of efforts, either early in the morning, so somewhere between 8 a.m. to 11 a.m., or very late into the night, somewhere between 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. I somehow find some very interesting, or at least before I had kids, I had this ability to work really late into the night. I was very focused. So the idea is to understand, when are you feeling with high energy? Because makers usually do need this time of high energy to be focused on making mode. So let's say that I'm a manager and I have just a couple of engineers and I do need to write code. So I might choose to put in the calendar and use the calendar into my advantage that I want to put time blocks where I'm not available, maybe even wearing these headphones, kind of a signal to say that I'm not available now. And being able to write code and produce the things that I need to produce as a maker, again, assuming that I need to be hands-on. And then later on during the day to find some time on where I want to be a manager. It can be slots open to have conversations, which I'm not really occupied on a specific thing, or it may be meetings that covering specific topics that I want to be able to work on. And then I'm trying to batch them together as much as I can with some space between them, like a few minutes to breathe and maybe drink coffee or water. But this batching concept is really important to make sure that, again, the schedule should be kind of batched into topics that I want to make sure that I'm spending the day on a specific topic and maybe batching those around the topic itself. So that's first. And if you use Google Calendar, which maybe some of you do use, there is this time insights that you can enable, which if you use color coding, so you can say for each meeting, like to use a color for maker, to use the color for management, but even other colors for management with peers, management with big groups, management like one-on-ones. And you can see the time insights or when you're spending where you spend your time, who you spend your time with. And then just ask questions on, do I like these ratios? Like, do I like how much I invest in each area? I used to do it like once a week and once a month. Like once a week for the previous week and once a month just to see how the trending of the previous month looked like. So before Google Insights, the time insights, I used to do it manually, like just having a spreadsheet and playing with that. But the idea there is that inertia is not a good friend of ours. And in this transition from maker to manager, it's very easy to be overwhelmed completely and let the schedule manage us. So that's kind of the first immediate advice that I think we can benefit from.
Yep.
The second one is it's a bit different and it's interesting. And in retrospect, I think that I had some luck, maybe, because I'm not sure that in retrospect I understood what I did, but this is what I did. And I think that when you make this move from a manager to a maker, from a maker to a manager, you really need to think of your knowledge diet, like the type of information you're reading and whether or not you like this type of diet. Because what I found really working for me as a manager is to focus more and more time. So I'm a software engineer in my background. I've been writing code for probably almost my entire life. And the default, the inertia, is to read the same blog posts or the same videos. And most of the type of that we read, most of the technical books that I read or post or videos, whatnot, was how to get something to work, right? So if you use some technology, some stack, your understanding on how to make something work. Where when I became a manager, I changed this type of the knowledge I'm consuming to understand why something was invented and how it works versus how to get something to work. So let me give an example. So if I'm an engineer and I'm using Kafka as a technology, I would like to understand how I'm using Kafka effectively. So you're kind of reading a lot of posts and videos on how to use Kafka at scale and how to properly configure things at scale and things like that. When I'm reading it as a manager, I'm trying to understand what append-only logs or data structure serve. Why Kafka, where Kafka was born, why Jay Krabs invented it in LinkedIn, what was the reason behind it, which other solutions were in place at that time that still led them to invent Kafka and invest there. So I'm trying to understand how Kafka works or how append-only logs work and why it was invented. And the reason is that when you become a manager, you often can't really be the best person to answer how to get something to work, but you can be a great person to ask questions on, am I in the right direction? Am I right? Am I thinking on the right trade-off? Do I have the right type of tools to consider? And when you understand how things work, when you understand the baselines or the fundamentals of the technology, then if it's Kafka or Pulsar or something else that implements the same notion, you can at least guide the team on whether or not they're in the right direction. And yes, you might not be the right person to answer exactly how to configure something in Kafka, but you can become better sounding board for them on their concerns. So like these are the two areas that, and again, I was lucky. I don't think that I intentionally thought that way back then when I became a manager for the first time. But what really bothered me is that I realized that I'm not as good as I was in answering exactly how to make something to work. But people really appreciated and consulted with me to hear which options we have, what are the different trade-offs. And it was well for me because I was always a big, always enjoyed reading a lot of books and watching a lot of videos and just learning as much as I can. So they still continue to come and talk with me about it, which kind of led me to this understanding that the reason that I can explain what are the options and what are the trade-offs and really explain to them how it works, like how the technology works under the hood, gave me enough credit to become a person that they still want to consult with, even though I'm no longer hands-on as I used to be and know all the nitty-gritty bits and bytes. So these are the two areas that I think you should really focus on, like the inertia, understanding the ratios between the manager and the maker and whether or not you like this investment, and then the maker energy and making sure that you're using it in the right hours of the day, which is a big lesson for me. And have like big chunks of focus time. And the second is just the knowledge diet. Like, are you happy with the type of knowledge you're currently consuming as a manager? And does it serve you better? Or are you trying to continue to be the best developer of the team, or thinking that you're the best developer on the team, even though you cannot write code anymore, almost at all at this point? So this is where I probably start with, maybe.
Well, yeah, it strikes me when you talk about that too, that underneath this is there's like a mindset shift that we have to make about what our value is and what's your value to the team. I'm not going to code in the same way and have the right information, but I still have value over here. And I just have to change the way I'm thinking about what I'm reading or the information or the way I consider my schedule or my value. That's kind of what I hear underneath.
Yeah, and I think that interesting exercise you can take from it is there is this notion, I think, that companies have that when they have a manager in the team, they kind of assume that one manager plus, let's say, 5 engineers, the impact of that unit now, that team, the impact of it is much bigger than 5 engineers and 1 more engineer, right? So the idea is like, so the question for me as a manager was, what should I do? How can I provide value that 1 manager plus 5 engineers is bigger in terms of the impact than 6 engineers?
Yep.
And this is an area where you can definitely try to articulate which value you bring to the table, as you said, that makes you an interesting enabler for the team. And for me, understanding how things work, understanding the trade-offs, understanding the technology behind it, but then consuming different type of content, like product oriented type of content, or business, kind of like business books or product books, really helped me to better connect into the team, into the business and the product. So I completely shifted my knowledge diet in a sense, but understanding that I have to produce or to provide different type of value to the team. So that's like an interesting exercise to take, is to write down like my value to the team. The reason I believe that me as a manager plus X, ICs would be more impactful than 6 ICs is because, and then try to fill out the answers. And you can do it just for yourself. You don't have to share it with anyone, but have something there that you feel that others might appreciate. And then you can, of course, try to get some feedback on it and see if your self-perception is actually how others kind of grasp your value or not. But that's the shift and how you stay in control during that time.
It's a great exercise to add to that. All right, I want to move on to something that is slightly different from this topic. So you have a really great chapter on code review, your management systems. So I love that idea of like taking code review to your management decisions. Can you talk about some of the ways that you do this and maybe some of the tools that you use?
Oh yeah. Again, I honestly don't think that back then when I started that, my direct manager thought I'm completely crazy. So the idea is this, as an engineer, right, we have such a wonderful feedback loops. We write code, we can run tests. So the test either is passing or failing, and we get this feedback loop, right? We have code reviews. So we have someone from the outside reviewing our code, giving us advice or tips or feedback, and we can improve. We can deploy it to production, and we can see how users are using that, or we can play with it ourselves and to see how the system works now. So just think about it. As an engineer, the feedback loop is constant on a daily basis all the time. Now, here the shift into a manager. Good luck with feedback loops, right? And good luck with even understanding whether or not you're actually adding value versus maybe reducing value. And how do you know that? It's incredibly hard to measure. There is no pass or fail type of feedback. So the idea there was to understand whether or not I can create feedback loops for myself, which I terribly missed as an engineer, like now that I'm a manager. And what became, at least for me, kind of obvious, that I've been reporting to someone who is much, much, much more experienced than me as a manager. And my belief here is that we're not leveraging probably one of the biggest assets that we have today, if we want to become better as managers, is that we already have direct managers. It can be the CEO, it can be a VP, it can be a director, it can be, whatever it is. But we potentially have other managers around us, maybe the direct manager and maybe peers that we work with on a daily basis, that they are much, much more experienced than us. At what? At leading and building teams and figuring out how to do it right and have proper tools and ask better questions and, a gazillion other things, right? So the question is, how do you unblock that? Or how do you open up an ability to extract from them faster feedback loops? So this what kind of drove me into creating a framework that I built for myself. The entire framework is like a spreadsheet with a few columns in it, so it's not sophisticated. But the idea is that we have, as managers, we have dilemmas during the day, and we can leverage those dilemmas to really understand how other managers or leaders would deal with it. So let me give you a dilemma, like a simple dilemma. So I'm a manager. I have 5 engineers working with me. One of them is saying, "Hey, you've got a few minutes to consult on something. Like I'm working on this feature, and we have a strict deadline. We need to put it in production by next week. We have a big customer waiting for it." Now the problem is that in order to complete the feature, I need to make a big refactoring in some area of the code that someone else in the team wrote. And I'm going to completely rewrite everything there, right?
Yep.
So what should I do? Like, should I just do it now? And they're looking at me. That's the dilemma. So we can pause here, right? And if you could imagine like a tree of realities or like possibilities, one would be, oh, listen, like you have to hurry. We need to release it to production next week. So yes, just rewrite everything. Let's move. That's option one.
Yep.
One reality where maybe that person figuring out that the area that they wrote is completely rewritten, where nobody talked with them. It might have some implications between the relationship between these 2 engineers and maybe me. And this reality, is here. And we can say, maybe this is what will happen. A second option would be, listen, maybe do some pair programming with that engineer. Just, tell them that it's urgent. They can stop, working on what they're currently working on. Just, do pair programming for a day, get the benefit of doing it together. Maybe that person has a lot of interesting, kind of battle-tested ideas on things that they know that the reason the code written that way is that, there were bugs or incidents kind of as evidence to it. And they'll be able to provide you a better solution if you work as a pair programming with them. So that's maybe world number 2. And again, you can kind of imagine that. World number 3 could be, listen, I would prefer to stop the other person's currently the task that they're working on. I will ask them to rewrite the code. You continue, do your thing, and we'll meet and together So they'll rewrite the code because they know it well and they wrote it initially, and they'll have the luxury of fixing it now to be able to support the new capability. And that's it. Just don't worry, it will be on time. Continue on the other things you have. So you could imagine, you have more and more and more options, right? So this person is coming to me, dropping on this concern, wants to consult, and you have numerous options. So that's the dilemma, and that's the context. So what I did is I tried every day to capture at least one dilemma. As you heard, this is not a big dilemma, kind of
right.
Once a year, something as big as a significant. It's kind of a daily thing that happened. And then what I would do is I would capture it. I would definitely, deal with the situation. So I would do whatever I did with that specific scenario. I would write one dilemma. I would usually do it after lunch. Like I would come back from lunch, still trying to somehow get back to work. Think about which dilemma I had earlier in the day, write it down. And then what I would do in my next one-on-one with my direct manager, I would go to them and offer them the dilemma, right? So here's the dilemma, here is the context. Now I would ask them, what would you do? I didn't tell them what I did, didn't tell them what I asked, I didn't tell them what I decided, I didn't tell them who decided, I didn't tell them anything about the solution, only about the dilemma and the context around it. And I asked them, what would you do? And I just listened. And I learned a lot of great questions that I didn't ask. I learned that I often rush to provide a solution. I learned that sometimes I said, you know what, I'll do it myself, or things like that. And just being able to provide this dilemma and context to someone else who's been around with enough scenarios before, it's quite remarkable to see which type of intuition and questions they have, and just learn from them. And then after they tell me the type of questions that they would ask and to better understand the situation and how they would approach it, I would tell them, okay, so now it's the time to unveil what I did in the situation itself, and ask them, what do you think about how I handled that? So that gave me, at least on a weekly basis, at least 2-3 dilemmas that I can run with my direct manager. I also did it with a few peers of mine, other engineering managers in the same group. So I just provided them the same framework. Here is the dilemma. Here is the context. What would you do? What would you ask? And I wrote also the solution. And I had this, on a weekly basis, I had this feedback where I can get better questions. And on a monthly basis, what you can do is you can go and look at this spreadsheet, and you can actually analyze which type of dilemmas you had. And above all, how is your reaction to these dilemmas? So I can look at the solutions and I can see, from the 10 dilemmas, 9 of them, I rushed to save the day. I rushed to make a decision. I didn't even ask them, what do you suggest to do? I just told them what to do. So just having those dilemmas in front of me and what I did on a monthly cadence really helped me to understand where, my blind spots, and being able to present those dilemmas to my direct manager and peers really helped me to learn how they ask better questions and how they show more patience, and how sometimes they don't even make a decision. Sometimes they just say, let's just wait a few days, or let's wait for new information, or let's do some analysis first. Which for me, it's no, let's make a decision. Why wait? So that's the concept behind the code review. And again, the idea is that if you have any other idea on creating shorter feedback loops as a manager, whatever it is, this is just one framework that I created for myself. And a few people copied that and play with that and got some good results from that. So if you have any idea on how to create more and more feedback loops and shorter feedback loops as manager, I absolutely think you should use it, because it really helps you to learn faster and get more ideas from people around you.
Well, yeah, and I love what, yes, feedback loops, you have to create them your own often. We've figured out how to shorten them. But I think the other part of it is often I'll hear people think, am I doing a good job? I don't know. And they get lost in this whole thing. And they're like, I'm doing a crappy job. And I'm like, what I love about your system is we're breaking it down to something discrete. It's a small daily dilemma. It's not this whole, what I think of as a binary. I'm doing a good job or I'm not. Well, where are you doing a good job? Maybe where do you need to continue to grow? And what I hear in the system is breaking it down into smaller atoms, like atomic sizes, micro, and then getting feedback on it and seeking that out can help you really understand where do you continue to grow, gives you the landscape much easier.
Absolutely, yes, I agree, and I think that even if you look on a monthly or quarterly basis on the dilemmas, you can learn a lot just by reading it and kind of reliving the situation and see how you dealt with it and say, no, now like I'm a better manager now. Now I would ask different questions. Now I would show more patience. Now I would, maybe make sure that they continue with to own, like to have I agency and ownership mindset when bringing dilemmas to me. So again, I definitely agree with you. It's a good area to understand where you need to invest more of your time.
Yep. And to notice like, oops, I jumped in too much, because we always do that, right? It's so easy for us to jump in. It's so good. And it prevents some of those. All right. I want to go on to a couple more questions before we have to end today. So having a core set of values can help align the team. And I know you think of these as fundamentals. I think sometimes as a trained coach, people like, oh, values, but, and I don't think we talk about it quite enough. I'd love to hear you talk about what you mean by fundamentals and how important and how you're using them, like in a practical sense.
Yeah. So it goes back to figuring out, what's my value as a manager to my team. And the thing that I think that if you look at communities, let's put aside, software companies, like if you look at communities, there is this notion that there is this unique values that either bring people into the community or kind of drive people out, or you don't even so I think that values or fundamentals are areas where they might look strange or weird for the outsider. So for some, it will be like a great area of, I really like to work or to be part of this community. It can be a company, it can be something else. And for some people, it will be, I'm definitely 100% don't want to be part of this community. It doesn't make any sense to me, right? And if I look, so I'm not talking about like the company values, because that's a bit more generic and speaks to a bigger audience, right? But if you look, like I'm this like SVP of engineering at Fodder, and I'm trying to think of what are the values for the engineering group that I think will either drive people out and candidates like will say, well, Fodder is not for us, or get people to say, I have to work in this company. And once they're in the company, what will keep them here for a long time, so they can have bigger impact. So if you think about fundamentals or values, I really like to understand whether or not it's differentiate enough, unique enough, strange enough, weird enough, all the great words to me at least, that you build a community with, right? So if you pick values that are too generic, everyone will say that. What does it mean?
Right, like transparency or communication. Yes, everybody says
like,
that.
Like be a good person, right? It's like, okay, let's be nice. Yeah, I don't know. So I really do look at it as can you really think on whether or not these values or fundamentals can they really differentiate your organization in a way, in a sense, and it can be either by serving the business, which is different than a different business. Or it can be helping you to attract or to retain talent for the long run. Like these are the two things that I really think we should focus on when we think about the fundamentals of the company or the organization. So I can give you like two things that are like they're still kind of weird for many people, and I'm very proud of in Fodder. So Fodder, just a short background. We're dealing with preventing fraud and abuse on the largest e-commerce merchants out there. And one of the fundamentals, the values that we decided on early on, is that we want to transform insights into impact within minutes, right? And how do you do that? So for Fodder, when we need to fight and prevent fraud and abuse, meaning the other side is a fraudster or abuser. They're extremely technical. If you block them, they will figure out ways to go around it, right? So they're as technical, as smart as us. The idea is that we don't want to have, so we have analysts at Porter, which is a bit strange. Not all companies have analysts at Porter, but even more, like even stranger. And the analysts are often coming from units or areas in Israel that like the Mossad or the Shabak, or even like lawyers or doctors and whatnot. So Mossad and Shabak is kind of like the NSA and FBI, I guess, in the US. And they absolutely don't know how to write code. They never did. And we decided that everyone in the R&D are writing code in production, meaning they will produce those insights into code so it will get to production immediately and produce impact. And this is a very strange decision because we do have constraints around latency and constraints around throughput. So how do you train an analyst who never wrote code before to produce code that will provide the analytical insight while keeping constraints on latency and throughput? It's really not trivial. So we built a lot of infrastructure and tools and training to get someone who's coming with zero context and get them extremely efficient. But the fundamental, the value for us is we want to transform insights into impact within minutes. And we are willing to invest anything we can and should to train the people and build the tools to make it happen. And for many companies, it makes zero sense. Completely zero. It's, and even for today, when I'm saying everyone writing production code, and say, but they're not engineers. What do you mean they're writing production code? I know they're writing production code. How do you do that? Like you have a few hundred milliseconds to provide a decision. How do they write effective code? Then we teach them how to do that, and we provide them the right tools. Like, really, that sounds like a lot of work. Yes, it is, but that's the value. That's the community. This is what we built, right? So that's just one example where you can look at this value and really make sure it's a bit strange for the outsider, won't fit most companies, but really, really works well for us, given the type of business that we do, and really attracts the right type of people for us. We want people who says training and building the right tools for analysts excites me. It sounds amazing. Versus saying, you know what, why should we even try to train analysts to write code? Like, let's just build tools for engineers who, that's the audience for us. This is, kind of a thinking on how to look at values and fundamentals for the organization, like the engineering, R&D, the analyst, data science folks around us.
Well, and I want to follow up with one last quick question. We've got about 5 minutes left. So something about you that you and I talked about when we were preparing for this was ceremonies. And I'm wondering if you can talk to me about what you mean by ceremonies and maybe if a couple of that your team are using, right now.
Yeah, for sure. So ceremonies, I think that most of them are always related to execution. So most of us probably are practicing or at least heard about Scrum, sprint planning and daily stand-up and retrospective and things like that. So when most people think about ceremonies, they think about execution-oriented ceremonies, right? So the daily stand-ups of the world. And I think of ceremonies as an emotional thing you can do to later on impact on the execution. So, and it's kind of funny because when we think about ceremonies for our families, right, we think about emotional things, like how do we eat dinner together? How do we show gratitude, right? It's emotional. It's not, we meet every morning at 8 in the kitchen and we tell each other what we're going to do for the day, and kid 1 speaks and then kid 2 speaks, and then, it's not that. But then in the office, it is in some extent. So if you look at the value that you produce, I'm trying to understand which type of ceremony you want to build around the value that will make people excited on the value itself and to participate or to practice that ceremony. So I'll give you a different example. It's a real world example happening in the past few days for me. We have one of the groups focusing on the entire public facing or the customer facing products and systems. And they really wanted to have a value around being able to be part of the ecosystem or affecting the ecosystem of the company. So the ceremonies that we looked at is how can we make sure that we have engineers participating not only in pre-sales and demos and maybe onboarding conversations with customers, but also joining BizDev to talk about partnership and understanding the ecosystem around the customer and around Fodder. So the developers can understand the ecosystem of payments or the ecosystem of fraud or the ecosystem of abuse and things like that. And the ceremony is to make sure that every month and every quarter, there are at least X engineers participating in this meeting. They're only listening, they're taking notes, sometimes maybe even asking questions. And then they're also sharing it back with the group. So like what did they learn? Who did they meet? What was interesting? What was surprising? And this is kind of helping us to take this value where we really thought about it is the value was kind of us, we serve the ecosystem. Like, so for this specific group within engineering, their value was we're serving the ecosystem, not only the customer. We need to think wider and bigger. And to serve the customer, the ecosystem, we have to have ceremonies to make sure that we not only meet with customers, we also meet with partners. We also meet with other vendors around us that we think could be interesting to integrate and partner with. And we learn from that and we bring it back to the team and we share what we learned from that. Now, is it effective? Like immediately for the engineer being in a conversation with, BizDev conversation? No. But the magnitude of the impact for the long run and the fact that they can hear from, instead of just getting it from the product managers, they can hear how the partner is excited and they can listen. I've been to this conversation with a partner and they're super excited about working together. And this is why. And they can share it together with the group, which makes the group like, I understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's the ceremony that we want to have. So the ceremony should be focusing on the emotional side, which will impact then the execution side. And we're focusing too much on the execution side with the ceremonies that we pick today. And maybe Agile is to blame for or to thank for, but that's my thinking there.
I am with you. I mean, I talk about emotions and the emotional side of work all the time, and I think we need to talk about it more. We focus too much on the execution, so I love that. Our time is up, unfortunately, everybody. That was so interesting. Thank you for joining us during the session. Oren will be joining us over on the LeadDev's Slack, where he'll be taking some questions. Head over to the Bookmarked channel where that'll be taking place. Thanks again for being here, Oren. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.